There's a millennial individual sitting across from their manager in a performance review, and the review is going well, and the manager says something like, "Is there anything you need from us?" And the millennial individual says no, everything is fine, and means it, in the sense that the words come out smoothly and without hesitation and feel true in the moment they are spoken. And then they walk back to their desk and sit down, and something in the vicinity of their chest quietly registers what just happened, because everything is not fine, exactly. There is a particular project that has been creating a particular kind of pressure for 4 months. There is a recognition gap that has been there longer than that. There is something about the way Tuesday afternoons are structured that has been producing a specific, low-grade, entirely unaddressed friction since March. None of it came out. The window opened and closed in approximately 45 seconds, and the millennial individual filled it with "everything is fine." This is not unusual for them. This is how it usually goes. The millennial individual did not always operate this way, or rather, they always operated this way, but there was a time when the habit had an explanation that felt more current. The explanation arrived with their generation's entry into adult professional life, which for most of them happened to coincide with one of the most significant labor market contractions in modern American history. The 2008 recession did not simply reduce job availability. It restructured the psychological contract between employee and employer in ways that were felt rather than announced. The implicit message delivered through layoffs, hiring freezes, unpaid internships as conditions of entry, and the widely shared cultural narrative of being lucky to have anything at all was something like, "Your presence here is provisional. Your needs are secondary to the fact of your employment. Gratitude is the appropriate posture. Asking for things is not." A generation that received this message at the exact developmental moment when it was forming its understanding of how professional relationships work did not receive it neutrally. It got encoded. The millennial individual who learned in their early and mid-20s that need was a liability in professional contact carried that encoding forward through promotions, title changes, and years of accumulated evidence that the original context had changed. The encoding is more durable than the context that produced it, but the professional context is only one of the rooms where this pattern runs. The same millennial individual who said everything is fine in the performance review also said it's okay when their partner forgot something that mattered. Also said you choose when a friend asked where they wanted to go for dinner, meaning it and not meaning it simultaneously. Also spent an afternoon doing something they did not want to do because declining felt like more trouble than the afternoon was worth. Also put the phone back down without calling the person they were thinking about calling because the timing felt wrong or the need felt insufficiently urgent to justify the intrusion. The pattern does not know the difference between a performance review and a friendship. It runs on the same underlying code everywhere it goes. The code says your needs are smaller than the needs of the situation. The code says asking produces obligation and obligation produces guilt, and guilt is worse than the original unmet need. The code says find a way to manage it yourself because that is what you have always done, and you are actually quite good at it. And being good at something is a reason to keep doing it even when doing it has costs. The costs are specific and worth naming because the millennial individual often does not name them even to themselves. There is the cost of the accumulated unmet need itself, which does not disappear because it goes unvoiced. It tends to accumulate quietly and without announcement until it expresses itself through one of several side doors. Disproportionate irritation at something small, a flatness in a relationship that used to have more texture, a specific tiredness that is not about sleep, an occasional flash of resentment towards someone who had no opportunity to address a need they did not know existed because the millennial individual never told them. There is the cost to the relationships themselves, which cannot fully reach a person who does not allow themselves to be reached. The partner who keeps asking is fine met with reassurance wants, eventually, to stop asking. Not because they don't care, but because every genuine reach that is deflected trains the reacher over time that the deflection is the real answer. The relationship calcifies slightly around the deflection. The millennial individual gets the privacy they did not exactly want and cannot quite stop choosing. There is the cost to the millennial individual's own sense of themselves as a person with legitimate needs, which is perhaps the most significant cost of all and the least visible. Because the habit of not asking, practiced long enough, does not stay a behavior. It becomes an identity. The millennial individual stops experiencing themselves as someone who has needs and manages them poorly. They start experiencing themselves as someone who simply does not have the kinds of needs that require other people's involvement. The independence was supposed to be a strategy. It has become, without anyone deciding this, a self-concept. There is a developmental story behind this particular self-concept, and it runs earlier than 2008. The millennial individual grew up during the specific cultural moment described elsewhere, the dual-income household. The latchkey years, the particular kind of emotionally unavailable parenting that the era's circumstances produced, not malicious, not even intentional, simply stretched, distracted, operating with whatever emotional resources were left after a restructured and demanding adult world had taken its primary share. The child who learns that adults are busy busy, that needs produce burden, that competence and independence are the characteristics most available for positive feedback, that child builds something functional and adaptive for the environment they are in. They get very good at reading rooms. They get very good at predicting what is wanted of them. They get very good at filling their own gaps without drawing attention to the fact that there are gaps. And then they become adults in a world that has different needs of them, a world that would benefit from their disclosure, their request, their willingness to be known rather than managed. And the childhood tool does not adapt easily to the adult context. It was too successful for too long. It got reinforced too many times. The millennial individual now does something similar to what their childhood self did, except the adults they are navigating around are colleagues, partners, and friends who would, in most cases, genuinely like to know what they need. The research on what psychologists call suppression, the habitual restriction of one's own emotional and needs-related expression, is fairly consistent in its findings, and none of the findings are particularly comfortable. Chronic suppression is associated with elevated physiological stress markers independent of the millennial individual's subjective sense of how stressed they are. This is worth pausing on. The body registers the suppression even when the person does not. The physical cost runs regardless of whether the millennial individual feels stressed, because the suppression itself, the ongoing active work of managing needs rather than expressing them, is a form of effort that the nervous system accounts for even when the conscious mind has made peace with the arrangement. Suppression is also associated with reduced relationship quality over time, and with what researchers sometimes call a progressive narrowing of the self, a gradual reduction in the range of experience a person allows themselves to have, which tracks closely with a gradual reduction in what they allow themselves to want. The millennial individual who has been practicing this for long enough sometimes arrives at a version of themselves they did not intend to become. Someone who has genuinely forgotten what they would ask for if asking felt available. Not someone who is choosing not to ask. Someone who has lost reliable access to the question. Recovery from this pattern does not begin with the ask itself. This is important because the advice often given, just ask for what you need. Set boundaries, communicate clearly, treats the symptom without engaging the mechanism. The millennial individual who hears just ask for what you need and feels a faint internal impossibility is not confused about the instruction. They know what the instruction says. The mechanism that makes following it difficult is not a comprehension problem. The recovery begins one step earlier, with the noticing of what is actually present, before the suppression mechanism has a chance to classify it as not worth raising. This is a smaller and more achievable practice than the ask itself. It is simply pausing in the moments where the automatic fine would normally fire, to register what is actually true, not to act on it immediately, not to determine whether it meets some threshold of legitimacy, just to notice it exists. The millennial individual who notices, in the 45-second window of the performance review, that there are actually 3 things they would like to be different, has done something that the automatic everything is fine does not allow. They have made contact with what is actually there. The contact does not require immediate action, but it is the precondition for the action becoming available at all. There is a particular sentence worth sitting with, because it appears in various forms in the thinking of many millennial individuals who begin to examine this pattern, and it reveals something important about the internal logic running underneath the habit. The sentence is something like, other people have real problems. It operates as a comparison that preemptively invalidates the millennial individual's own need before anyone else has had the chance to do so. The need is measured against the most serious needs imaginable, found to be insufficiently serious and quietly shelved. The comparison is a feature of the suppression mechanism, not an accurate analysis of the need's legitimacy. Needs do not have to compete for scarcity against worse needs to qualify as real. The Tuesday afternoon friction is real. The recognition gap is real. The thing the partner forgot is real. The call that didn't happen is real. Allowing these things to be real, granting them the basic legitimacy of existing, rather than requiring them to justify their own existence before they are allowed to. Surface is the first movement toward being a person who can occasionally ask. The millennial individual walking back from the performance review, sitting down at their desk, feeling the quiet register of what just did not happen. That person is not lacking in communication skills, not insufficiently assertive, not failing at some obvious task. They are running a program that was installed at a time when it served a function, in an environment that has changed enough that the program is now producing costs that exceed its benefits, in a body that is recording those costs whether or not the mind has caught up with the accounting. The program can be revised. Not quickly, not without friction, and not through the sheer application of better advice, through the slower, more honest work of noticing what is actually there before deciding it doesn't count. There's also something worth saying to the people in the millennial individual's life who have been on the receiving end of the automatic fine. The deflection was not a referendum on the relationship's safety. It was not evidence that the millennial individual does not trust them, or does not value closeness, or has decided the relationship is insufficient. It was a very old program running in a new context, producing results that neither person in the relationship intended or particularly want. The millennial individual individual who stops saying fine for the first time in a conversation they have been having for years is not suddenly becoming a different person. They are finally, and with considerable effort, becoming more of the same person, the one who is always there. Managing everything quietly, waiting for the moment when the managing felt like less of a full-time job than the alternative. Everything, it turns out, is not entirely fine. And that, finally, is useful information. Thanks for watching. If this felt familiar, leave a comment about the thing you last said you were fine about. And consider that the person you said it to might have actually wanted to know the truth.